Right, I'm going to now open it up to reflections and comments. There are a couple of questions coming in, actually I've got 3 already, very much on the your spectrum of rigour. So I'm going to introduce a couple of those in a moment. But let me start at that end of the room and start with Lord Hastings.
I just want to make a brief comment, simply because I have to go for a dinner in the House of Lords, and if I can just be completely upfront, I'm chairman of Millennium Promise in the UK and a member of the Global Millennium Promise Board and directly accountable for the Ghana operation, which I'll be visiting in August. There was a lot of interesting reflections in what you said, and some of which I don't dispute. But there was also some misinterpretation of data, and I think you have to take a correction on the hit and acknowledge it. The way in which you've divided the facts between the 17 million and the number of people who receive benefit in the villages is slightly inaccurate, because the real figures were given by Belai, who is in fact not directly managing the project, because he is of course over in East Africa, and we're talking about the management being delivered from our West Africa centre, so he's not directly accountable. So that slightly snidey comment at the end was not appropriate. But when it comes to the actual data on how the Ghana project will be measured, it is going to be done accurately and independent by KPMG. That is a contract that has been won quite openly, quite rigorously by multiple competitive agencies. And that figure includes £3 million divided by DFID over 5 years for evaluation. The real figures are 5-year figures. They're not 17 million, they're 9.5 million for the project, for the 6,000 households over 5 years. That gives you a very different set of outcomes, and 3 million of which is dedicated to evaluation. And I don't think you'll be able to question the value of what KPMG does.
Well,
I can just say that the Millennium Villages project authored business plan for the Upper East Ghana site, which is available on the DFID website, identifies the full cost of this project. It is £17 million. That's been questioned twice now. I don't have it to put on the screen, but that is the figure that's in the report, and I've divided it by the number of...
broken down separately.
That's the cost of the project. I'm not misstating the cost of the project.
No, the cost. No, that does not. That includes the evaluation, which is quite independent to the operational cost.
That is part of the project.
No, it is not.
It is naturally part of the project.
No, it is not. The actual
Absolutely
cost of the project, which includes agriculture inputs, electricity, water interventions, and buildings and business development, is one thing. Evaluation is quite a
That's
separate.
the on-site expenditure. The full expenditure is the cost to British taxpayers of that project.
It serves your interest to inflate the figures. It is not accurate.
It is not inflated. The figure is directly in a DFID published document written by the Millennium Villages project. I'll put it on the screen. I'll put it right on the screen. Would you like to see it?
All right, put it up. Well, in the process, just wait. Let's come into the centre of the room for a couple of, yes, the gentleman here and then 2 over here.
Excuse me, sir. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Charles Cullimore. I was High Commissioner in Uganda for several years, and I've been involved and interested in the whole development area since, and I'm now President of the Business Council of Africa. So I come at this from a very practical and also business, if you like, oriented area. And I'd like to pick up on your suggestion that we broaden this and discuss this question of how do you evaluate projects, not necessarily the Millennium Village project, and I really would value your comments. I think there's increasing sort of skepticism among professionals as well, and I speak to quite a number of insiders in DFID about how effectively aid in general is being evaluated. We have a situation, perhaps particularly acutely in the UK, because of the government's commitment to the 0.7% target, which means that a huge amount of extra money is being pushed in the direction of DFID, which makes it even harder for them to carry out the detailed evaluation you need to do to work out whether the project is working or not. So more and more money is going into budgetary support, which is generally acknowledged as you can't evaluate it. It's very difficult for reasons of sovereignty apart from anything else. And yet more aid is going that way. A second point, which is based on just subjective comments, it'd be interesting if somebody could do a study of it, is that there does seem to be a tendency for DFID, and no doubt that applies to other aid agencies, to repeat contracts to those outside agencies who come in with favourable evaluations. How do you deal with that? And that's a very human difficulty, but I think it's a real one. And finally, the target culture that we now have, which makes it, again, puts more and more pressure on individual aid practitioners within DFID and the experts to find ways of spending the money without worrying too much about whether that's being done effectively. In other words, without evaluating it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I briefly comment on that? I just want to give kudos to DFID in this scenario. I was on a conference call, this was January of 2011, with Nick York, their head of evaluation, Andrea Cook, who works on evaluation, in which they were discussing evaluation of the project and insisted that there be, for the first time, an independent evaluation of the Upper East Ghana site. And it's only because of their wisdom against the pressures that you're talking about that independent evaluation, mostly by British academics, is going to happen. And it's just delightful. The pressures that you're talking about are important. I want to point out that sometimes they are successfully fighting them.
I mean, I think we would take a view that it is possible to evaluate budget support, and we've got people in the room who've worked on that. But also, I would correct the view that more aid is going in that direction. If anything, I think we're in reverse gear on that one at the moment. So,
You say budget, when you're talking about general budget.
yes, or sector. Yes, fine. Gentleman there, and then the woman next to her.
Yes, a comment and a question for Michael Clemens. Having been involved in economic project appraisal myself for many years, I don't know the figures of this particular project, but from an economic point of view, all costs are included in the cost of a project, including the cost of evaluation. Now, I don't know whether that is formally, from a financial point of view, it depends who's paying, but I mean, from an economic point of view, all costs of the project are a cost because there is an opportunity cost issue. That's simple economics. Now, my question to Michael Clemens is, could you perhaps elaborate a bit on what you said about randomization, because I'm not an expert on that, and I'd like to hear what is the reason for your misgiving on randomization.
Can I get you to hold that?
Sure,
Because I've got a cluster of questions around that particular issue that will come. Can I just take the one next to this gentleman, and then I'm going to give you a chance to answer a few.
Right, I'm speaking on behalf of a project in Nigeria, run by Nigerians for Nigerians, in Kaduna State, which is where the Millennium Villages project was. And our concern, obviously, is that huge amounts of money have been put into this. And how can we collaborate in some way to help to make sure that we best get the best possible outcomes? Because that, surely, in the end, is what we all want. And in terms of, I'm not quite sure what I do in terms of a question. I just want to make the point that we were aware of this project back in 2010, that my friends in Nigeria went to this project and said, can we collaborate with you in some way? Could you come and see what we're doing locally? How can we work together? How can we make the most of this thing that's happening? And they were told that, no, we can't sort of talk to you, that everything has to come from America. And I actually, when I saw this was happening today and it was about evaluation, I thought somehow I have to feed in local information about this, and how do we make this useful to local people? And so I went on Skype with my colleague, and I have a page and a bit of his feedback of what he said on Skype, and I don't want to waste it wouldn't be wasting, but I don't want to take everybody's time by reading it now. But afterwards, I'd very much like to just give you the comments that he was making about
Thank you, I'd be delighted.
what was happening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, coming back to this point, I will give others an opportunity, but they're just online. We've got a few questions clustering around the points you made on the rigor spectrum, and rigor doesn't equal randomisation. Dr. Stacey Hope, working in the UK and Kenya, asks you, is there such a thing as being too right on the rigor spectrum? And if so, what are the repercussions? Ulrika Nishan, who works with IFPRI, just down the road from you, can you elaborate on your criteria for when the benefits of RCTs and quantitatively rigorous analysis outweighs the means and when it does not? And we've got a few other comments coming in about this issue of whether whether the cost of a project should include evaluation or not. One from James Wero is working with the Columbia Global Centres, who says you have to concede, Michael, that the cost of an evaluation cannot be considered the same thing as the cost of delivering the project, which goes back to Lord Hastings' point, who's had to leave to go to a dinner in the Lords. But so a few points there about clarifying your views on the rigor spectrum, and I think this goes on to the point about, just give us a little bit more on what you mean about rigor not equal randomization, equal randomization.
Thank you. That's the really interesting one. About cost. Absolutely, it is. Delivery cost is not the same as an evaluation cost. But as this gentleman very helpfully pointed out, if the question is what else could have been done with that money, that's irrelevant. Every pound of that could have been spent on something else, and that's the economic cost-benefit analysis, and that's what I'm engaged in, not a financial analysis. And the full cost of the project, as made quite transparent by DFID, is £17 million. Now, the much more interesting question is how to choose the proper place on this spectrum of rigor. Why does Michael Kramer, one of the intellectuals I admire most in the world, say that roughly 1 in 1,000 aid projects should get a randomized controlled trial? So a humanitarian intervention after an earthquake, for example, clearly the cost, the chance of being wrong about delivering water to people who don't have it after an earthquake is very low. The cost in human lives and the opportunity cost of conducting a rigorous evaluation in that situation is very high. It would be absolutely ridiculous to demand any sort of impact evaluation, rigorous or otherwise, in a situation like that. There are situations where I think it is logistically impossible to randomize. To just mention briefly some of the evaluations I've done that are not randomized, and I can't think of a way that I could have done them in a randomized way. I recently did an evaluation of the effects of guest work in the United Arab Emirates on families in India. And although you can imagine hypothetically a fair mechanism by which jobs in Dubai would be allocated randomly by some sort of lottery to Indians, no company is doing that. I don't know of a recruiter or a construction company that would be willing to do that. And so that's a situation where the cost of randomization is apparently quite high. I might have to, I don't know, buy them off or something to convince them to randomize. It's not going to happen, so we need to find something else. And what we used in that particular instance was a natural experiment involving a sudden collapse in hiring during the Dubai construction crisis to try to get a group of families that was quite similar to other groups of families that had migrants but didn't have migrants because they happened to apply to jobs in India just as the crisis hit. All kinds of evaluation methods out there. Randomization is an excellent one and a highly transparent one. Lots and lots of very interesting situations where it can't be used. And that doesn't mean to throw up our hands and just accept the statements of passionate, intelligent people who are involved with the project, but try to get some sort of other objective toehold on what would have happened without the project. And that's often possible. It's often possible to very cheaply move to the right. Just to state a particularly salient example, in the Millennium Villages project, there was no interest in the beginning in randomizing. We wrote in our paper that they could have. They didn't want to. That's done. What could you do without that? Well, it's what we did. We used a method called differences in differences, which is to compare trends at the sites to trends off the sites. Nothing in anything I've put on the screen has involved randomization in any way, and yet I think we learned quite a lot, at least much more transparently than doing before and after analysis from tracking trends off the sites. And the leaders of the project apparently agree because they've started to do it in several papers. So the question is, how can we approach a reasonably transparent estimate of what would have happened without the project? Lots and lots of ways to do that without randomization.
Okay, very good. I just need to...
Can I comment on this?
Yes, can I, just one moment. I'm just giving... hold on, just, Bilay, just one moment. I do want to just read out this comment because I do try to be as fair as possible. Margaret Wanjiku, who's a PhD student at the University of Nairobi's Institute of Development Studies, says, I think Dr. Clemens should also mention the strong points of the MVP. I'm an African living in a country that has 2 Millennium Villages, and there has been true transformation of poor people's lives. At least the lives of 500,000 Africans have been transformed. Okay, over to you, Bele, and then I'm going to go around the room again for one more round.
I just want to make a small point on the last comment by Mr. Clement on the resistance of the project for randomization. The point is, I think I made it clear when I was making the presentation. Are we really looking for, random treatments within the community, or we are looking for random communities in the country? I mean, I just don't get this thing. I need to be helped on this one. I believe if we want to have like as many as 10 clusters just to make, reasonable size for the N, and go for 10 clusters of maybe this size, 50,000. And I think it would be practically very difficult to carry out this kind of thing. And particularly when you are clearly mentioning in your presentation at the first instance saying that it should be done at reasonable cost. Basically, if you try to tenfold randomized trials on 10 different clusters in the same country, it just makes the whole thing impossible as far as I'm concerned. The idea that I was trying to explain is if this random trial is going to be happen at households with the same clusters, it is very difficult to do that because most of these things, particularly the service side of this project is a public goods in the community, and the communities have, all of them are sharing this thing, all of them are involved. We can't have one with that intervention as experimental and one with, for control, and that will make the whole thing difficult. So that's one thing that I want to explain.
Thank you. Michael, do you want to respond directly to that?
Thank you very much. As we described in our paper from 2.5 years ago, it would be costless, zero cost to have done this randomly. And what I mean by that is that there are treatment sites and there are comparison sites. Had those been identified in advance, and then the pair, which member of each pair of treatment or comparison sites received the treatment were chosen randomly, everything else would be identical. All of the surveying you're doing at the treatment sites, all of the surveying you're doing at the comparison sites, absolutely everything else. There would have been no additional cost. It's just the intellectual step of choosing by lottery which of the current treatment or current comparison site actually got the treatment. That could have been done and it would not cost anything. This is all an irrelevant discussion because I can tell by now that the project is not interested in that. What we've been trying to push since 2.5 years ago is that there are many, many ways, given a more transparent analysis, given a more independent analysis, to get a better hold on what the true impact of the project is, even without randomization. So it's really a moot point by now.
Okay. Bella, you just 30 seconds in response. Yeah.
I'm sorry to come back on this point, but what does that suggest? I mean, do we have to leave out these people for 10 years until this project is over without any intervention just because they are in control groups?
That's what you're doing in the comparison sites now. The comparison sites are not getting any treatment. There are currently comparison sites and they're not getting the project.
That's why we persistently and consistently say that the villages are not good comparison because they are very close to the sites and they are, not free from all kind of spillovers. And this is absolutely difficult. And you cannot go, I'm telling you from the practical perspective, you cannot go to a village where you cannot contribute a single thing and 10 times a year to collect the data.
Okay.
People are expecting you to do something there.
Okay, thank you.
All right. The Lancet article used the comparison villages,
yes.
So apparently they consider them to be valid.
Yes, I think we can't have it both ways here. They're either comparisons or they're not, and there are tests for comparisons. But
Precisely.
Nevertheless, let's not go down that particular rabbit hole. I think the point here is that how you get to the point of an impact evaluation that can hold its head up on the spectrum of rigour requires very careful attention to these issues about where your comparators lie and so forth. I'm going to take really quick questions. So I have anything from that side of the room? I mean, literally, a main point, please. I don't want full paragraphs because we haven't got time. So the gentleman in the corner then.
My name is James Morton. I've been working in monitoring and evaluation all my life. I'm very concerned by Michael's statement that we can't expect people who do microfinance to be honest about microfinance. We can't expect people who do cook stoves to be honest about cook stoves.
What he said.
I accept...
It's not about honesty.
Well, it
Not about
is.
honesty.
To me, it is about honesty. If they're not good enough to understand the quality of their product, you're effectively saying that we can't ask Barclays Bank to be honest about LIBOR.
I think we know the answer to that one, don't we?
I think you see my point. But I want to turn the question a little bit round onto Michael. You know the American university scene, I don't. Why was Columbia University so weak on this point, which I think is the picture you're painting?
Ooh, okay. Very quickly, yes, 1, 2, 3, and maybe if I can, we were going to run over time, and I really don't want to do too much. Very quickly.
Elizabeth Blantyre in News. You said Mexico did it right, but you didn't tell us what they did. How did they evaluate the interventions at different sites?
Okay, just the technique there. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Sami Amar, an evaluator and economist at Coffee International Development. I'm just back from a training course in randomized evaluation at JPAL, and I don't think anyone is suggesting, even the most sort of vigorous proponents of randomized evaluation, that it should be done systematically. And I don't think that the sort of 1 in 1,000 ratio is particularly helpful, because it should really be a case-by-case assessment of whether or not it's relevant. In the case of the Millennium Village, though, I don't understand how a randomized evaluation would be helpful, simply because within the village you've got such a high level of intra-cluster correlation that you can't look at anything.
But it's across villages.
And at the village level, comparing one village to another basically gives you no statistical power. So how do you actually do randomized evaluation that is helpful in that sort of setting? It's a bit beyond me. Thank you.
Fine, and the gentleman there.
My name is Patrick, President, Middlesex University Politics and Development Society. I would like to thank Michael and the gentleman in Nairobi, but it's just to thank you, because this whole conversation that is going on, in most cases, especially when it comes to African countries, they're only going to be told what has been discussed. And the way you're coming across is like you are in the battle of it. It's like you're trying to put to account what has been achieved, and you've come up with these formulas that you think can put to account what the MDGs have achieved, which I would like to commend you very much, because it kind of levels the ground. Like this gentleman here said that he's been to Uganda, that's where I am from, and I guess he can give a good conversation on what development and whatever is in there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just the gentleman there, very quickly.
Sorry, I'll be brief. I just wanted to...
Say who you are. Say who you are.
Sorry, I'm Ronald Snack from DFID. I've just co-authored a sort of 40-page guidance on how to do evaluations on cash transfers for DFID. I just wanted to point out that every single evaluation that DFID do has to be independent now, and they're also quality assured now by a panel of people who include some of the incredibly clever and incredibly skeptical people who Michael's already quoted today. So while your concerns are valid, we're aware of them too, and we're trying to insulate ourselves from that.
Okay, thank you very much. So,
Just briefly to talk about these, or no?
Yeah, but I want to give Bele.
Yeah,
do
please,
you have any last comments there, Bele? Because we are going to have to close down very soon. I'd like to give you a chance to say a couple things at this point.
No, I just want to thank this forum basically, and I'm really very encouraged that this discussion is no more in Washington and New York. It's getting down to the regional level. I'm also, I urge and encourage, this kind of discussion to be done, countries level where people are struggling, and I believe that's where the battlefield is. and we have to listen from the people, and we have to get out of this kind of very polemics kind of discussion and see how best we can learn from these people. And the other thing is, honestly speaking, I also want to encourage every one of us, partners, to come up with something different. I mean, if there is anything, we know that there are a lot of organizations with a lot of resource, a lot of expertise and world lead expertise, but we don't see them doing anything. We just want to see if there is any other alternative. I am here, telling you the path that I passed. 20 years experience on development, and the only time that I see some kind of light after the tunnel is when someone is coming with some kind of integrated development thing, because I believe this will create some kind of critical mass for further development in the future. And I do believe that the only way to do this thing is to go through integrated development and simultaneous approach. So please come with solutions, do something, and let's cross-fertilize experiences so that we can come up with something vivid, that will help millions of people here to get out of this situation.
Thank you.
If we keep on just talking this thing, we will not get anywhere. Perhaps this is not an academic discussion for this 100 million people here. It is a life and death matter, and most of these things have been done yesterday, and keeping them and rolling them for tomorrow is I believe is crime, and we just have to do what we can right now. And this is what we have contributed, and we want others also to contribute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much, I should say now, for your contributions today. Michael.
I want to thank you too very much. It is precisely because it is a life and death matter to use aid well that impact evaluation is important, and that was really the guiding. That was the fundament of everything I said. James Morton, thanks a lot. I wish I had your experience in impact evaluation. I do not even slightly suggest that any of the people involved have been dishonest or unethical in any way. All I mean is, if I am a judge and I'm being asked to decide on the guilt or innocence of my son, I should recuse myself, because my own thought processes are shaped by that situation. I cannot be asked to evaluate objectively Nancy Birdsall, who is my boss, because she pays me. And it doesn't matter how upright, morally, and honest I am, I can't do that. That's all I want to say. It's Elizabeth. What did Progressa do? They happened to randomize. So they had limited resources at the beginning. They were starting in rural areas. They knew they could only start in a limited number of communities. And Santiago Levy, who is now the chief economist of the Inter-American Development Bank, together with some other wise folks, convinced them to hold a lottery for which communities would get it first, so that politically favored communities wouldn't get it, which is actually the best politically way to do it. A side effect was that it turned into a nationwide randomized trial that allowed quite definitive statements to be made about how effective the project was. Is it Samyar? Sami. So in our paper, which is in the Journal of Development Effectiveness by me and Gabriel Domabin, we actually do the power calculation, and what we come up with is that 20 pairs of treatment and comparison villages would be sufficient. You could question how we did it, but that's the number we came up with. And given that the project, at least according to the Jeffrey Sachs 2003 book, The End of Poverty, wants there to be hundreds or thousands of these intervention sites, randomizing in the first 20 seemed like a very small thing to do to us, although I can imagine that seeming like a much taller order if you're involved in the day-to-day of it.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed. I mean, there's no question, and certainly my experience, that discussions around the Millennium Villages project tend to divide a room very quickly. And what I would say, though, that this is a really interesting initiative. It is very much a let's do something, let's try something, and we should absolutely acknowledge that this is really trying to do something. But I think Michael's coming at it from a different perspective. It's very much around, okay, let's accept it is trying to do something, but let's ensure that the claims that then are made about what it does do meet the test of really rigorous evaluation. And he's put on the table a very clear set of principles for how we do that, and those are certainly principles that we adhere to very closely here in ODI. That's a really important point. It's a really important contribution. And for that, I think it's generated a very useful debate. There will, I suspect, be continuing discussions about, certain facts and figures. It seems to me, Ballet, that the best way of all to overcome some of this misperception that you talked about is to get that data out there, be as open as you can about the whole thing, and then you can begin to be talking about the same figures, and not to incrementally do that, but to go for full public disclosure as quickly as possible. Other institutions have done it. It's made a world of difference, and I would say there's real merit in that. Thank you very much indeed, Michael. I think it was very stimulating. Thanks to all of you. Thank you very much, Belay, there sitting on the end of the video link. Thanks to all of those watching online, and thank you for coming along. We'll see you again soon, I hope. Thank you.